Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly Hebrew word study. And again, wishing you a wonderful week. Maybe I will see some of you at the company picnic on Saturday. I hope to be there. And please come up and talk with me and let me know how things are going if you happen to see me there. So, with that, we're going to continue in Judges chapter 19. As I had mentioned last week, this is a very troubling chapter and some very disturbing things that we're going to get into today as we hopefully finish this chapter out. So as we start in verse 13, um, mentioned as we closed last week in verse 12 about the city of Gibeah, in that this was a city that had tricked Joshua way back in the book of Joshua into creating um, a kind of a contract with them, a league uh, covenant, if you will, of protection, and they tricked them into this covenant. And so these people had a really bad reputation. They were also in the land of Benjamin, and you'll see going through the Bible that the Benjaminites were very challenging people to deal with, that they were kind of lawless, and so you'll see that here. So as we pick up in verse 13, what's interesting here is that this Levite who was traveling with his concubine, remember we talked about her, um, and his servant, and was looking for a place to lodge. And his intention was good. He wanted to go to a place that was safe. He wanted to go to a place that was of his countrymen. He didn't want to go to a city that was not part of Israel. So in his mind, he's looking for a safe place with his kinsmen, with people who in his mind were God-fearing and serving God. And he mentions also here another city called Ramah or Ramah. And as I read about and saw this word, I couldn't help immediately making the connection that in the New Testament, when King Herod was tricked, and the wise men, the Magi who left, were warned by an angel not to report back to King Herod that they had found, the baby Jesus, that he went and slaughtered all the children 2 years of age and under. And the Bible then records a verse talking about weeping in Ramah. And so, again, not sure there's any connection here, but in my heart, it kind of made me think that, what's about to take place here in Gibeah is near Ramah, and it's just two very tragic things that happened with the slaughter of innocents, if you will. And so they passed by their way. The sun went down upon them. They were by Gibeah, which belonged to Benjamin. So all seemed like it should be good. They turned inside to lodge in Gibeah, verse 15. And of course, the city didn't seem large enough to have any inn, and there were not, you know, hotels anywhere. And so it was very customary that you would take in boarders, you'd take someone in to lodge here, but there was no one. And so you sat into the city gate, you waited for someone to approach you and show kindness to you, and it didn't seem like this was happening. So, but in verse 16 comes an old man from his work out in the field. Interesting, the Bible does call him Zecher, which is an old man, and we'll see how that maybe plays in later on here. He was also from Ephraim, and he was sojourning or somehow was spending some time here in Gibeah, and the people here were Benjamites. Again, notice how it says this twice, belongs to Benjamin. The people were Benjamites. We start getting the impression, as we'll find confirmed later on in the Bible, about what type of people the Benjamites were. And so, verse 17, he lifted up his eyes. He saw this guy sitting in the street with his concubine, a servant, and a couple donkeys. And the old man says, "Well, where are you going and where have you come from?" Verse 18, he says, "We're passing from Bethlehem, Judah, to Ephraim, and that's where I'm from. I went to Bethlehem, Judah. Now I'm going to the house of the Lord." You will notice that Lord is all in capital letters, so he's referencing the house of Yahweh. And so he is going to Shiloh. which is where the tabernacle currently was, and wants to go on a religious pilgrimage, basically. And he says, I'm sitting here because nobody receives me into the house. And he's saying in verse 19, he goes, I have enough food. I got enough straw. I got enough to feed my animals. I got enough to feed me and my those that are traveling with me, the servant and my handmaid. So he says, I'm not going to be a big imposition on anyone. I just want a place so I'm not sleeping out under the stars, a little bit of protection. And so this old man in verse 20 says, shalom is how the Hebrew goes. Shalom, peace be with you. And just come and stay with me. Just don't lodge in the street. So here's where we get the indication that this elderly man knew something was happening. Just don't lodge in the street. Just come stay with me. So verse 21, he brings him into his house. He even gave him a few things. He washed their feet. They did eat and drink, and things were all going along just very, very nice in verse 22, until, until the men of the city, and here's where it's interesting, certain sons of Belial. And we're going to just take a quick look at that in the Hebrew in verse 22. And we want to get a feeling for, what does it mean to be wicked people? And because we also want to know what it means to be righteous in the Bible. And so if we can understand the two, very polar contrasts here, we see that these men, it talks about Ha'ir, um, Anashim, Bene, men of this city, and it uses the word Belial. So the beit in front here is a preposition meaning in, and they're in worthlessness. It means they're just totally consumed with um, worthlessness, destruction, scoundrels, ungodly, wicked, the basis here is that they had no worth within them. And again, those are challenging somewhat words as we want to think everybody has something good about them, right? Especially as we interact with people, we always look for the good in people. And, although there are times when we do struggle in that area, but here they're not quite so charitable. It says that they found that there were men here that had nothing good within them, sons of Belial. And these guys beset the house round about. They beat at the door. They were knocking the door. And the word for beat here is not just a gentle knock at the door. It means they were very adamant. They were trying to beat the door down and to get the attention of this old man, the master of the house. And again, here we see where this beyond words horribleness begins. It says, bring forth the man that came to thy house that we may know him. Again, this is a very similar saying as what we have studied in the book of Genesis at Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot was living in Sodom. The two angels came to visit him, and immediately the men of the city started beating on the door and wanted to um, molest, and using the word know here in a very intimate way of knowing, and molesting and assaulting and abusing um, this man. And of course, in verse 23, this master of the house, the old man, responds and went out to them and say, wait, guys, stop. I do find it interesting that he does use the word my brethren. Um, Now, whether that is a word used out of generosity as a way to try to get them to stop, or if it's a way where he is connecting with them saying, I just find it hard to believe that he's connecting with them saying, you guys are just like me, we're all brothers here. Um, Again, this whole thing is very challenging, so I'm really struggling to try to put any kind of thoughts together other than just to go through it word by word. Anyway, this old man is saying, nay, my brother, and nay, I pray you. He's trying pretty hard. Don't do this wicked thing. Seeing that this man has come into my house, don't do this folly. Again, very reminiscent and similar to what was going on in Sodom with Lot and the men there. And so, again, here goes the story in a very similar way. And here's where it gets tough. And he says, "Behold, here's my daughter, a maiden, a virgin, and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can humble them. You can have your way with them and do what seems good unto you, but don't do anything so vile to this man." Again, oh, this is so hard. This is just like what Lot wanted to do. He wanted to throw his daughters out to these men of Sodom, and here we see the same thing replaying again. I just can't comprehend how, first of all, this he says he's an old man, so he's got a daughter who is still unmarried, so she was not obviously young. He seemed to be by himself. How could he even think of doing such a thing? I understand, the commentators will talk about hospitality and that you want to protect the guests that you have. But again, this is the same type of pattern of behavior we saw Lot taking in Sodom, where he was ready to throw his daughters out um, to these wicked, evil men to protect the guests. Now, obviously, those guests that Lot was trying to protect were angelic beings, maybe a little different, but again, just very hard to understand here. And so here this man is wanting to throw his virgin daughter out to them. I can't imagine what fear and anguish she was going through right now, looking into her father's eyes with the dread of what was going to happen. And especially this concubine. Remember, even though it was a concubine, he was warming up to her. He was saying nice things to her. He had just been with his family. But now the whole flavor of this switches again, and he has taken the position of not a loving husband but more of a, a heartless master. And again, I can't comprehend why this is going on. And but what we have to again tell ourselves is that this was a city that had no police force, had no military to call out. There was no one, no constable, no one keeping the peace. I can't imagine living in a time like that where you were subject to these marauding, wicked people who for whatever came upon them, whether they were drunken or just wicked without even being drunken, how you even protected yourself and what it was like to live in an environment like that where you never know who is going to come knocking on your door and want to do harmful things to you. Um, yeah, it's just very challenging. So, verse 25, again, just like it was in Sodom, the men wouldn't hearken unto them, and somehow he seemingly got the door open, and he took and the man threw his concubine out the door. How the old man's daughter got out of it, and how the men of the city didn't give up, because as we know in the story of Sodom, they wouldn't even consider taking Lot's daughters, and that the angels had to hit them with blindness to keep them from breaking the door down. Somehow these men, whatever the case, were somewhat pacified with this concubine, and he threw her out the door, and it says they knew her and abused her all night long until the morning, and when the day sprang, they let her go. Again, I can't get this picture in my mind, and then I can't get it out of my mind as to what's going on here and what kind of situation would even create this. You would hope that anybody who was a valiant husband would do all he could to protect his wife, even at his own loss of life. This is what I would do. This is how we would feel. I would fight, and they would have to kill me to get to my family. I can't imagine. Again, this is supposed to be a man of God. This is a Levite. This is someone who, learned in the scriptures, but yet we see here that life is not valued and people are not valued. Women were not valued. Again, can't imagine living in this time frame. So, with all that being said, we have to move on to verse 26 that then came the woman in the dawning of the day, fell down at the door of the man's house, and look at how it speaks here, where her Lord was. When we do look at the Hebrew, it is Adonai, which is a Lord, a word used, translated Lord, obviously not capitalized like the Lord God, but it is a master. It is a someone who has power over her. And obviously this is what happened. He took power over her and basically sentenced her to this punishment. And so the word is very appropriate here in a really harsh way that he was her Lord of her. And she came in the morning and clung onto the door. And then verse 27 said that her Lord, again, very appropriately trying to convey that this was a very harsh relationship that had turned here, and his heart was hardened. And anyway, he rose up in the morning, opened the doors of the house, and went out to go his way. Sees her there, fallen by the door. Her hands were, hanging to the threshold. I can't imagine what this woman's last moments of life were like, suffering this abuse to the point of death, that she was gripping on this threshold. He had to have heard her cries and her screams, and why it didn't touch him, and why there's just too many questions to ask that are challenging here. And he, right, gets up, looks at her, and said, "Let's be going." Again, you just want to take and slap this guy. You just want to shake him and say, We're kind of human or inhuman person are you to be have treated someone this way?" And not even there's not a lick of compassion in here in these first couple verses of what he says to her. And then again, very challenging, but none answered. But it doesn't say she didn't answer. It says none answered. And again, so harsh, so inhumane. Um, the I think the words are framed in such a way to just show that there's no compassion there. There's no understanding of sanctity for life or appreciation for the life of another human being. And I just can't imagine living in a time frame like that and being in a place where life was treated um, so nonchalantly and had no value. And so she didn't answer. Uh, we don't see anything where he's, you know, grieving, where he's broken down, where he rents his clothes, all the other signs of grief. It just says that he took her up upon his donkey and he rose and made it to Shiloh, made it to the place of his house in verse 29. And then, believe it or not, it gets even worse. He comes to his house. He takes a knife. He lays hold on his concubine, divides her into pieces, cuts her up together with her bones into 12 pieces, and somehow sent her to all the coasts of Israel. It doesn't say how he did this. Obviously puts them on either a donkey with a messenger, a donkey without a messenger. Uh, we don't have clarity here. But anyway, this was vile. This was a horrible thing. And it was so in verse 30, as we wrap up here today, that there was no such deed done then nor seen ever after, that the children of Israel, since they came out of Egypt to this day. And then how this closes says, "Consider of it, take advice, and speak your mind." I have to just take a look at what the Hebrew says here, because this is just um, beyond words. And so as we look at it, it says Hayom, which is this day, Hazeh, this, and Simu, which is consider, and is the word for to put into place. Again, nothing profound there. Lachem, which is to them, aleha, of it, and then it uses the word ayin sade, vav utsu, which gives us the word of to counsel, to plan, but it comes from the word utterance. It comes from inner. your inward parts, and then it closes with the word um, daberu, or comes from the word davar. You'll notice that the word is in a PL form, which in Hebrew is one of the most forceful ways to use it, and it's also in an imperative. An imperative is a command form. So this chapter ends that these people are supposed to speak up, uttering words from as deeply innermost consciousness as they can bring up in a very forceful imperative form. And so obviously this is how you would feel if you knew this would happen and you were living in these cities, and it's a summoning to all of Israel to rise up, to voice their disgust and their utter dismay over something like this that would even happen. And so, with that very dark and somber thought, we're going to close out today's ending of this chapter 19. There's going to be more. You got to come back for chapter 20 and find out, how did the people respond? How did they speak up? How did they rally together in response to this totally horrible, the unthinkable deed that was done in Israel? So here you have it as we close out this chapter. And I pray that you aren't too down by this, but come back next week and let's find out what happened together. God bless you all. Take care. Bye bye.